Hi everyone. Today let's discuss about the topic redemption of preference shares. First, let's see what is a preference share or the meaning of preference shares. Preference shares are those shares which has certain preferential rights over equity shares. Let's see what are those preferential rights. The first preferential right is the right to dividend. The preferential shareholders has a preferential right to receive the dividend before the equity shareholders are paid. That means the preferential shareholders will be receiving dividend first before it is paid to the equity shareholders. Next is the right to repayment at the time of winding up. When a company is at the stage of winding up, the preferential shareholders will be paid their capital first before the equity shareholders. So these are the two preferential rights which are available to the preference shareholders. Now let's see what are the different types of preference shares. The first one is redeemable preference shares. Redeemable preference shares are those preference shares which can be redeemed after a certain period of time. The maximum period of time which is allowed is 15 to 20 years. The second is irredeemable preference shares. Irredeemable preference shares are those shares which cannot be redeemed during the lifetime of the company. Cumulative preferential shareholders has the right to receive the dividend at the time when it is actually paid by the company. They have the right to cumulate their dividend and to receive it at a later date. Non-cumulative preference shares are those shares which do not have the right to cumulate their dividend. They will not receive any arrears of dividend. The next is convertible preference shares. Convertible preference shares are those preference shares which can be converted into various other forms of securities such as equity shares, stock, bond, etc. Next is non-convertible preference shares. Non-convertible preference shares are those preference shares which cannot be converted into any other form of security. The next is participating preference shares. Participating preference shares are those shares which has a right to participate in the surplus profits of the company. Non-participating preference shares are those shares which do not have any right in the surplus profits of the company. So these are the various types of preference shares. There are 4 types which are divided: redeemable and irredeemable, cumulative and non-cumulative, convertible and non-convertible, participating and non-participating preference shares. Now let's see what is the meaning of redemption. The word redemption simply means repayment of an obligation. So the redemption of preference shares simply means the repayment of preference share capital to the preference shareholders. Thus, redemption of preference shares means repayment of the preference share capital which is contributed by the preference shareholders to them. So redeemable preference shares are those shares which can be redeemed by a company during its lifetime. The maximum time period allowed will be 15 to 20 years. There are certain conditions which has to be fulfilled by a company before the redemption. The first condition is only fully paid preference shares can be redeemed. Second condition is only surplus profit or revenue profit can be used for the purpose of redemption. That is, capital profit cannot be used for the purpose of redemption. Those profits which can be divided or which can be distributed as surplus or as dividend can be used for redemption. The third is premium on redemption of preference shares has to be provided out of divisible profit. That is, capital reserves or capital profits cannot be used to provide premium on redemption. The next, if the shares are redeemed out of profit, then the value equal to the nominal value has to be transferred to the capital redemption reserve. So these are the basic 4 conditions which has to be fulfilled by a company for redemption of preference shares. Now let's see what are the various sources of redemption of preference shares. First one is out of profit. As I said earlier, redemption can be done by or out of divisible profits. Divisible profits are those profits which can be used as to distribute as dividend or as surplus to the shareholders. These reserves include general reserve, revenue profits, etc. So preference shares can be redeemed out of profits which are otherwise it is to be used for distribution as dividends. The second method is to redeem out of fresh issue. Redemption of preference shares can be done by issuing fresh equity shares of the company. So the fund required for redemption will be raised by issuing new equity shares. The third is the combination method. The combination method is simply the joining method of out of profits and out of fresh issue. In this method, you can take certain amount from profits and issue the balance equity shares which is required for redemption. Thank you.